Thank you, Professor Semmler and Jose Bastos Neves and the entire SCEPA team for hosting this exciting event. So today I want to speak a bit about newest research on resilience finance and in particularly tackle the role of the diverse impact of climate change around the world, the role of hope in terms of crisis resilience, and science diplomacy as having a network of scientists that can work in implementing important ideas. So we all agree that when we look into the world surface temperature since the recording in 1891, that climate change is happening and there's a trend of the climate getting hotter. My research, in particularly at the New School, focused on the diverse impact of climate change in economic terms, and we can agree that the world, the countries are really different from their starting temperature, the mean temperature around the globe. Countries also vary by the GDP composition, agriculture, service, and industry productivity around the globe really is also very different in the different nations. And then there is a different temperature composition for productivity by GDP sector. And when you factor this together, that you say that the countries vary by temperature starting grounds, by GDP composition, and by the top temperature level for their particular GDP composition, you come up with an index that I created in which I show that the greener countries in the graph below are the countries that have the most time ahead and are actually currently experiencing a short-term GDP prospect that is rising as the globe is warming when you only consider temperature and their starting ground and GDP productivity. And but also countries that are red and which are more housed around the equator will have run out of time for favorable productivity by GDP composition and country temperature earlier. And when you look into this inequality on a bar chart here, you see in the left bar chart, I have colored in green 1/3 of the countries that have the most time ahead. But when you only factor or color in green 1/3 of the gains, which I do in the right bar chart, you see the green bar shifts up, meaning that only a few countries will be winning more from climate change on the short run, then more countries will be losing. And to drive the point of inequality in terms of climate around the globe, we can also say that the countries that have a prospect of gaining in terms of climate change on the short run are also the ones that are emitting more. There's a positive correlation between being a climate gaining country and greenhouse gas emissions, and they also get already now there is a positive correlation with migration inflow and financial inflows. So the inequality is also in terms of who's moving into these areas that have a rising GDP prospect on the short run and only in terms of economic output. When you see this inequality, you immediately start thinking about redistribution and thinking about ethical components that really say that you should only engage in an action that you would also have incurred onto you. So Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative can be applied to this problem. So even if you're on the gaining side, you should not engage in the action of making climate hotter, because you also have to see it from the losing perspective, that what you incur on others. Hans Jonas really also applied this categorical imperative on the relation between human beings and their environment. And John Rawls also argued that you have to analyze each ethical predicament behind the veil of ignorance, in which you are not evaluating if you are gaining or losing from an action, but you see the overall ethical dilemma from all perspectives. Timothy Nicolin at the New School Department of Philosophy is also speaking about the responsibility to protect, and that it is different for different countries in the world. On my end, I first calculated a redistribution scheme based on GDP per inhabitant. And here you see in this graph, the greener the country, the more the country should be distributing to red countries. But there's always this question about the political feasibility of plans like this. And that's where I got inspired by Professor Semmler's climate bonds solution. So to potentially tax countries that have an economic gaining prospect in order to redistribute the funds for bonds that can be paid out to countries that are losing the most and the fastest. And these bonds could also be funded by debt. So that would be a strategy. But who should be paying for these bonds, and who should be the net beneficiary of a common climate bond? And my research that I currently conduct is more thinking about the country's responsibility to protect from climate change, the ability to use resilience finance powers, and international science diplomacy ties in order to really enact and enable such a redistribution scheme. And I came up with 3 large pillars, and then I have different indices that show and highlight the different responsibilities of countries based on these pillars. So the first pillar is thinking about the diverse impact of climate change. The second is thinking about the hope to really change problems with financial power and resilience finance. And the third pillar is concerned about science diplomacy ties. In the first impact, in the diverse impact of climate change pillars, I look into, in the first index, into who's going to be gaining or losing from climate change around the globe, and who's contributing to climate change with CO2 emissions. And here you see especially the role of China as a major emitter, but also the US, Russia, and some European countries seem to have, under these conditions, a really high responsibility to protect the world from climate change. When you also factor in climate flexibility as the range of temperature zones that a country can offer, you see that China, US, and especially Russia plays a key role in the responsibility to protect from climate change. And in the third index, I'm also thinking about climate change in terms of CO2 emission changes over time, and that would be an incentive. If you have this bond strategy running over different years, that you could have this incentive if a country changes the attitude towards climate and CO2 emissions, that they can shift from being a contributor to the bonds to be a recipient of bond transfer payments. As you can see here in the US in 2019, there was a huge drop in CO2 emissions, and that would shift a country from being a net payer for the climate bond solution into being a recipient of transfer payments, for instance. In the second large part, I'm concerned about financial crisis and what countries have really the means to intervene, and especially with financial means when there is a crisis. So I took this data from 1960. There's reported data of financial crisis around the globe, and the response of countries to financial crisis. And there are factors like guarantees, lendings, capital injection, resolutions, rules, asset management, and major communication and stress tests. And here you can see that really the US, China, and Russia, but also Germany are countries that are very well versed to combat crises. So they have a high intervention mode. What we can also say, when I only focus on future-oriented resilience finance, who paid or who combats crises with guarantees, lendings, capital injection, you can see that China's role is increasing. And again, China, US, Russia, and Germany seem to be very well versed to combat large-scale crises with financial means. When you also consider the bank lending rates, so how easy it is in a country to obtain necessary funds to change crises, to turn crises around, you see that China and the US are really excellent places to tap into lending or benefit from good lending rates. And in the very last pillar, I think about science diplomacy, what countries do have the ties, the international impetus on economic terms to change something in the world, to get capital moving very quickly around the globe. So first, I tackle the issue that where CO2 is emitted does not mean that it is also consumed in terms of the consumption. So I use, instead of only CO2 emissions, also consumption-based trade-adjusted CO2 emissions. And you see that really shifts the role of China being not so demanded to protect the world, but Switzerland in Europe and the Nordic European countries and Canada being more on the forefront of a responsibility to protect the world from climate change. In terms of science diplomacy, and this is this term that's currently used often, this is the idea to use scientific ties, scientific networks to push and drive for ideas, especially in case of large-scale problems, complex problems that are more important and cannot be only solved by one country in the world. And climate change is one of these examples where the solution cannot be simply be pushed by one country. And when I created the science diplomacy index, I took in how is the academia quota in a country, how many academic institutions are there, and how well are they recognized on the international basis, and the diplomatic ties of countries in terms of embassies and consulates and representations around the globe. And here you see this major leadership of the US, but also of Russia, and this finding this at this moment in time when there is there's so much tension between East and West really makes you argue for climate change being a problem that is so large that only large blocs can tackle in a common scientific acknowledgement of the problem. And that really is a plaidoyer of keeping a scientific discourse open and trying to acknowledge the problem and step away from national positions on the climate agenda. And in the very last index, I really look into economic connectivity. How well is a country connected? How do financial flows go in and out in terms of trade, remittances, foreign direct investments, and migration levels. And here you see that especially small European countries, Luxembourg, Switzerland, but also Hungary, are countries that seem to be a very economically connected and seem to be a good starting grounds to keep an idea and to really implement an idea to have potentially a large bonds solution in one of these small countries that are highly specialized in moving capital around the globe very quickly and very efficiently. With this, I very much look forward to your comments and really encourage also to write me in the chat or by email. This is still under construction, and I very much look forward to hearing from all of you and also being inspired by excellent presentations that I trust will follow throughout the entire day. Thank you.